Chair, if proposition champions the idea of access to information, they cannot say that the primary mechanism that is providing and allowing that information to exist in the first place being removed is a good thing. Because we tell you that these subscription and paywall mechanisms are precisely what allow free content to be of good quality and accessible in the first place. But first, a few call-outs. Proposition's case works on a set of precarious assumptions. Three, primarily. First, that absolutely essential content can only be accessed to a sufficient extent behind paywalls. We think this is false. Second, that paywalls are an insurmountable obstacle to be able to access that information. We've already responded to this as well. And at three, that journalists will continue producing quality content absent these income mechanisms. Now, we have around 5 to 6 key pushes that disprove these points. So first is that there is free content that is readily accessible online. This information is very much accessible. For example, if you see things or news reports about bombings, about warfare, you see that there are dozens of news channels that cover this content and provide the necessary information to ensure that it's accessible to the general public regardless of your socio-economic class. So information is still very much accessible even with the existence of paywalls and subscriptions. In order to respond sufficiently to this, Proposition had addressed both Seth's and Jaron's points when they say that the content that is locked behind paywalls or behind subscriptions are typically expert opinion columns, for example, or high-quality articles that may be good but don't necessarily represent the monopoly of information or the most important information that exists and that people need to know, or that this information is absolutely crucial to understanding current situations and current events. So we tell you that this information is good, but it's not necessary. Proposition fails to respond to this, and therefore they're not able to prove why this information is so important to access in the first place. But then, tell me, how often do you load on free sites? The proof is in the pudding. The nature of online content means that it is globally accessible. This is another response to opposition's case, of government's case, of how information is inaccessible. Because if they tell you that information costs 3,000 rupees or basic wage within India, we tell you that the same content that costs 99 cents within the United States is easily accessible within India as well, because online news platforms are globally accessible. As a Filipino, I read the New York Times, the BBC, and many other news channels. I'm able to access them because it's the internet, it's globally accessible. But then, second, that the free content that they champion on Proposition is in fact funded by paid platforms. We already tell you, coming from Seth, that news is expensive, it is hard, it is difficult, it needs money. And the free content that is of quality has to be funded by some money. And that money has to come from somewhere. Primarily, we tell you that probably looks like paywall subscriptions, paywalls mechanisms and subscription mechanisms that allow that free content to exist. Absent those contents or those forms of models of income, we think that it becomes a lot harder to push out free content. So a plethora of things could happen. Either A, free content just becomes generally less accessible or less numerous in quantity, simply because there are less amount of companies that are able to afford to continue pushing out free content. B, the quality of free content decreases and becomes increasingly sensationalized, because in order to capitalize on clicks, for example, or advertisements, you need more people to view this content, pushing news channels or journalists towards further extremes to engage the audience, even if it means embellishing certain details in order to create audience engagement. Think the tabloid advertisements and celebrity trash news articles that you see online to generate income. Or that three, the content that actually matters, the content that requires a lot of money to fund, simply no longer exists absent income mechanisms. Which leads me to our next push, that you assume on Proposition that the content that exists behind paywalls will still exist absent them. But Proposition doesn't tell us why. Because if my primary incentive mechanism as a journalist, for example, as a corporation, is to be able to generate income, and that's why I push out these quality articles in the first place. If there's no income to be made for me, why do I still continue to push out these articles for free? It just doesn't make sense. But if they tell you advertisements or other forms of income mechanisms are able to exist and will still continue to fund this quality content, my question is the extent of that quality content going to be the same? Because they needed to prove the converse if they're going to argue that paywalls or subscriptions aren't sufficient enough to fund this. Why are advertisements or clicks enough to fund quality content in the first place? And when they aren't able to answer this on Proposition, I think you simply just have to buy our down-to-earth analysis that direct subscriptions, which thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people subscribe to, provide a numerous amount of money and income to be able to support these forms of free content or quality content in the first place. But then, next, they tell you alternative mechanisms like donation exist. Donation just doesn't work with propositions frame, because if they argue people are already having hard times paying for 99-cent subscriptions, I don't see why they are able to, or why it is even fair for them to donate large amounts of money for nothing in exchange to corporations or to news articles or to news platforms, for example. So we tell you that even if new subscriptions are expensive and the content behind that's locked behind them is generally important, there's also another higher principle that proposition had to respond to. That principle being it is simply unfair for journalists to do what is essentially unpaid slavery or unpaid work just in order to cater to the general public without any form of compensation in return. And if proposition is also again unable to respond to this principle, as we have failed to in the round and I'm the last constructive speaker, then you honestly have to believe our principle. And we tell you that it's simply unfair for these journalists who have their own families, their own children to feed, to be able to risk their lives and to put their lives and live at stake for absolutely nothing in return. So we tell you that the free content that they're advocating for is in fact paid for by these subscription models. But then even if you don't buy all of this, that those subscription models coexist with free content and alternative mechanisms for income. So if it is indeed profitable and fair for news corporations to use advertisements or clicks, for example, to earn money, then they will also put quality content and make it accessible to the general public. You get this from Jaron and even from Seth. And so what this means is that quality content exists on either side of this debate. The question is, where do people have more options? Both for the journalists to generate income and for people to decide what form of subscription or what form of income they want to subscribe to in order to access this quality content. Because we tell you, if it is so true that subscriptions or paywalls are so hard for people to access, they probably don't opt into this in the first place and just resort to free memes or ads and clicks in the first place, and quality content migrates towards those free forms of income, and therefore what we get propositions benefits anyway. So in our worst case scenario, we're still able to opt for benefits. For all these reasons, I'm extremely proud to oppose. I think it's a clear opposition win at this point. Thank you.